All right, so we're gonna get started on our 63 to 72 front end kit back half install. I got a 64 C10 chassis right here. This is a long bed. I picked it up from Truckin' Crazy out there in East Mesa. So we got it on the table. It's all leveled out on jack stands. So this is what we recommend you start with. A stripped stock chassis, get all the unnecessary components off, rip out the original suspension, any cab mounts, cross members, etc. Just start with something as simple and clean as possible. And then we'll begin the install. So first, we're going to raise the main cross member up to the chassis and locate it using the 2 1/2-inch bolts. Now this is just to locate the cross member, not to the final assembly, anything like that. Use a floor jack or a buddy to help you out. Center hole to center hole. So that's something we're going to need to tighten the photo on. Come in.
The going bolt down?
Yep. So just loosely.
So now we're going to put the upper hat on. We're just going to set it on top, line it up with these 3 holes here. And all you're doing is putting these bolts in the 3 holes and then use that to locate it for where to drill a couple holes on this side here. So now that it's located, you can come over on the side, mark out your holes that you need to drill, take the upper hat back off and drill them out. On some of these frames, on the passenger side frame rather, you're gonna have this little foreign piece here. So that's gonna get a little bit in the way. So what you're gonna wanna do is line up those 3 holes, and you can do a couple things. You can mark it and bend it back. You can cut it. Whatever you wanna do, you just need to get it out of the way. So what I'm gonna do is line up those holes, and I'm gonna mark it over here to see where I need to bend it. And I'm just gonna take a simple crescent wrench, bend that right down, and get it out of the way. Double check it. Make sure it lays nice and flat. So that should be good right there. The other option is to just cut it, weld it, however you want to do it. And now we're going to do that and see how it turns out. The thing is the other side, mark out these holes, drill them out.
So next step, we're going to install our frame brace. And in your kit, you'll notice that the part number is etched on the bottom. That indicates left or right, left being driver, right being passenger, and it will be towards the front of the truck. This notch here is for clearance for this bolt that we used to locate the cross member. Also note that the motor mount holes will face the front of the vehicle. So slide it in here. Sometimes might need a little persuasion. And then we pop the 1/2-inch bolts, sandwiching the chassis frame stiffener, chassis, and the cross member. Nothing gets tightened yet, and then repeat the process on the passenger side.
So now you're just going to take the upper hat again, place it back up here, and put all the bolts in, but just hand tighten them for now. And then repeat the process on the other side.
So when installing the Crossmember, it's important to use a floor jack. Makes things a little bit easier. That way you can lift. It's kind of a heavy piece. You can lift it up to where it meets the frame. Throw a couple locating bolts in there. Don't torque anything. Don't tighten anything down yet. Just finger tighten whatever you can get your hands on at that point. Just to sort of locate everything. Then you'll same situation for the upper halves. You'll locate them with the 6 bolts, and you'll mark and drill out the remaining bolt hole locations. Take it back off. Drill your holes. Throw the bolts back in, again, finger tight, nice and snug, just to true everything up for the most part before we go into torquing at the end of the install. That's when you'll go ahead and you'll lock everything down. So that's where we're at right now, is kind of a loose mock-up, I suppose. And once we hang everything, we'll go ahead and tighten it all up, button everything up, and that'll be it. All right, so the next step, we're gonna install the motor mount purchase. Again, just like before, the part numbers are etched into the parts, designating left or right, left being driver, right being passenger, and also one side of the motor mount has a formed piece of sheet metal that will always go towards the front of the vehicle. We'll start by dropping it into the cross member between the 2 tabs, using a 1/2-inch bolt, slide it through, and then it'll pivot towards the frame seat. Now, in this step, since nothing is tightened down, you will have to lift the cross member up to get that motor mount to line up to your frame stiffener. So do that, lift the cross member up, just pop the little bolts in. That'll kind of hold things in place for now. Just like so. All right, so the guys behind me, they're now tightening everything up, getting the cross member sucked up to the chassis and get all of those components fastened together. Once everything's snugged up and it's finished, we're gonna move on to hanging control arms, airbags, and shocks, and then this thing's gonna be a wrap. So now we're gonna install these bump stops. And what that is like a droop limiter. So the upper control arm will actually, if you go to jack this up or put on a lift or something like a 2-post, the upper arm will stop against this, limiting how far your suspension will hang, you know, relieving a lot of tension off your ball joints and shocks and things like that. So this just pops in. This is dedicated place. Comes with the bump stops, comes with the hardware. Pretty self-explanatory, but cool little feature we added to this new front end. All right, so now we're gonna move on to the upper control arms. These ones have the poly bushings, crush sleeves, and ball joints already installed. So let's throw them on. So once you get the bolts through the control arms and upper hats, you're gonna wanna go ahead and tighten them up all the way. You don't need to do any loose mock-up on these. So one thing we've added to this version 2 Crossmember is the use of eccentric bolts and washers for lower control arm adjustment. We manufacture this bolt in-house, and we laser cut these washers, and it all fits into the lower control arm pivot mount. So that's something that's important to us, to make sure that you guys can align these trucks, and it's easier than previous versions.
So now we're going to be installing our lower control arm. So you're going to take the cam bolt and cam washer, place the arm into the lower cross member. Take the second bolt and run it through the opposite direction. Place the cam washers on the inside of the pivot. And then you're going to want to go ahead and tighten everything down.
Now we're going to install the airbags using supplied hardware. We do recommend a little bit of Loctite on these, but you know, for install purposes of this video, we're going to skip the Loctite. Do the lower first.
So now that we got the airbags installed, we're going to go ahead and install our shocks. So you're going to start with the upper shock mount, and we've actually added a weld nut on the inside, so it's just going to be a bolt that you run through the top. Then you're going to tighten that down and then repeat the process for the lower and the other side.
So now it's time to install our rack and pinion unit.
So the driver's side over here is going to be your fixed one with a weld nut inside. On the passenger side, there's a hole in the bottom so you can get a nut and a washer and tighten it internally. But that's cool.
All right, so now we're going to install our tie rod adapter bump steer eliminator kit. Comes with the aluminum adjuster, an FK Heim, our stainless steel heat treated taper pin, as well as misaligns. Also a 9/16 18 jam nut that you'll put on the rack and pinion unit. You do not need to trim your rack and pinion unit to install these. So just take it out of the box and start running the parts together and you're good to go. All right, so we're gonna pop our spindles on. Pretty simple procedure there. Ball joints, castle nuts. We're not gonna be doing the cotter pins and all that just yet.
After those spindles are on, we're going to put the misaligns into the Heim, and the large one is going to go to the top side. Run your taper pin through the top, small misalign on the bottom, followed by your castle nut, and then later on you'll put your cotter pin right through there.
And as you torque these down, it will draw the taper pin down into the spindle, creating a nice tight fit with taper interference between the cast spindle and the billet pin. All right, so that's pretty much a wrap on our front end kit install. It went super smooth. You don't need a whole lot of specialty tools, you know, 9/16, 3/4, 15/16 wrenches and sockets, a drill and a 3/8 drill bit, and a center punch, and you're pretty much good to go. The instructions do include all of our torque specs that are recommended for each size fastener, and we also recommend that you use blue Loctite on several of the items. So you'll see that in the instruction manual. It is not included, but you know, go ahead and get yourself some of that. And that's a wrap, man. It went smooth and super happy with the outcome. And now we're going to move on to installing the back half.